A father abandoned his lame son at a frosted road. What a duke did after finding him will shock you. The child was already blue when Adrian Blackwood, Duke of Winterbourne, found him. 7 years old at most, twisted leg folded beneath him, lips cracked and colorless, small hands frozen mid-reach toward a carriage that was no longer there. Adrian's horse had nearly trampled the boy before he saw him, a bundle of rags barely distinguishable from the snow-dusted road. The child was conscious but beyond speech, his dark eyes fixed on the horizon where fresh wheel tracks disappeared into the December morning. Those eyes held something worse than physical suffering. They held the terrible understanding of deliberate abandonment, the soul-crushing knowledge that someone who should have protected him had instead left him to die like unwanted livestock on a frozen Yorkshire road. "Christ," Adrian breathed, dismounting before his mind had fully processed what he was seeing. He stripped off his greatcoat and wrapped it around the boy's trembling form, and that's when he felt it. The twisted leg, the clubfoot that made the child's gait uneven, and his value, in someone's cruel calculus, less than the cost of keeping him alive. Who did this to you? Who left you here? The boy's cracked lips moved. One word emerged, barely a whisper, but it shattered something in Adrian's chest that he hadn't known could still break. "Papa." Wait, before the next confession unfolds. If this story has already stirred your heart, tell us where you're watching from. To make sure you don't miss the next betrayal, kiss, or redemption, subscribe and join our circle. The next heartbeat might change everything. Now, back to the scene. Adrian Blackwood had not wanted children, had never wanted children. His own childhood, raised by a cold father and a mother who died when he was 6, had convinced him that fatherhood was something he was better off avoiding. At 34, he'd successfully evaded every matchmaking scheme, every widowed lady with children seeking a titled husband, every societal expectation that he produce an heir. And now, lifting this broken child into his arms, feeling the fragile weight of him, the way those small hands clutched desperately at Adrian's shirt, as though fearing he too would disappear, Adrian felt every careful wall he'd built against human connection begin to crumble. "I've got you," he said, his voice rough with emotions he couldn't name. "I've got you, and I'm not letting go. Do you understand? I will not leave you." The boy's eyes, a startling shade of gray-green, like storm-touched seas, searched Adrian's face as though trying to determine if this was truth or another cruel lie. Then, slowly, he nodded. Adrian settled the child in front of him on his horse, keeping one arm locked around the small body while guiding his mount toward Winterbourne Hall. The boy was dangerously cold, his breathing shallow and labored. They needed to reach warmth and medical care immediately, or Adrian would be carrying a corpse rather than a child. "What's your name?" Adrian asked, trying to keep the boy conscious through conversation. For a long moment, there was no answer. Then, so quietly, Adrian almost missed it. "Thomas. But Papa called me the cripple, said I wasn't worth my name anymore." Rage, white-hot and absolute, flooded through Adrian. What kind of monster looked at his own child, saw a disability, and decided the boy's life was worthless? What kind of father abandons a 7-year-old to freeze to death on a winter road? "Your name is Thomas," Adrian said firmly, "and you are worth everything. Do you hear me? Everything. Your father was wrong, monstrously, unforgivably wrong." "My leg," Thomas whispered. "It's bad. Can't walk right. Can't work like other boys. Papa said I was a burden. Said he couldn't feed a useless mouth. Your father is a fool and a villain." Adrian tightened his hold on the boy. "And he's also a criminal. Abandoning a child is a crime, Thomas. What he did to you, it's not just cruel, it's illegal. If I ever find him, I'll see him hanged for it." Thomas made a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so broken. "Nobody hangs gentry for what they do to cripples, Your Grace. I heard Papa say so. Said the law don't care about broken things." Your Grace. The boy had recognized Adrian's quality despite his current disheveled state. Smart child, then, observant, which made the cruelty of his abandonment even more unconscionable. "The law should care," Adrian said, "and I care. That's going to have to be enough for now." Winterburn Hall rose before them, gray stone and imposing architecture, softened slightly by the snow that clung to its turrets and crenellations. It was Adrian's sanctuary, his fortress against the world's demands and expectations. He'd lived there alone for 6 years, ever since his father's death, with only his household staff for company. He was about to shatter that careful solitude by bringing home a broken child. Strangely, he found he didn't care. His head groom, Peters, ran out to meet them as Adrian rode into the courtyard. The man's eyes widened when he saw Thomas. "Your Grace? Who is?" "Inside, now. Send for Dr. Whitmore immediately. And have Mrs. Hendricks prepare the blue bedroom with fires and hot water bottles. This child is half frozen and needs warmth." Adrian dismounted carefully, keeping Thomas secured in his arms. "Move, Peters. The boy's life depends on speed." Peters moved. Within minutes, Adrian had Thomas upstairs in the blue bedroom, the guest room closest to Adrian's own chambers, warm and bright with southern exposure. Mrs. Hendricks, his housekeeper, appeared with an efficiency that reminded Adrian why he'd kept her on after his father's death. "Dear Lord," she breathed when she saw Thomas. "The poor lamb." "What monster would—" "His father," Adrian said flatly, carefully laying Thomas on the bed. "His father abandoned him on the North Road because of his clubfoot, said he wasn't worth feeding." Mrs. Hendricks' face hardened into an expression Adrian had rarely seen on the usually gentle woman. "Then his father is going to hell, Your Grace, and that's the Lord's own truth." She moved to Thomas with practiced efficiency, beginning to remove his frozen, inadequate clothing. "You did right bringing him here. We'll warm him up proper." Dr. Whitmore arrived within the hour, a gruff, practical man in his 60s who'd been tending to the Winterbourne estate for 30 years. He examined Thomas thoroughly while Adrian paced the room like a caged predator, unable to be still while the boy suffered. "Severe exposure," Dr. Whitmore pronounced. "Frostbite on 3 toes of his right foot, the good one. The clubfoot actually protected itself better due to the way he was curled. Malnutrition. This child hasn't been properly fed in months, possibly longer. Several old injuries, poorly healed, and profound emotional trauma that's going to take far longer to treat than the physical ailments." "Will he live?" Adrian asked, the question emerging more desperate than he'd intended. "If we can ward off infection and get proper nourishment into him, yes. His spirit is what concerns me most, Your Grace. A child who's been abandoned by his own father, that's a wound that doesn't heal easily." Dr. Whitmore closed his medical bag. "He'll need careful nursing, constant attention for at least a week. Mrs. Hendricks can manage it, but it would help if he had someone he trusted sitting with him. Children recover faster when they feel safe." "I'll do it," Adrian said without thinking. "I'll stay with him." Both Mrs. Hendricks and Dr. Whitmore stared at him. "Your Grace," Mrs. Hendricks said carefully, "that's very generous, but surely you have estate business." "Nothing that can't wait." Adrian looked at Thomas, who had fallen into an exhausted sleep, his small face still too pale against the white pillows. "I pulled him off that road. I promised him I wouldn't leave. I keep my promises, Mrs. Hendricks." "Of course, Your Grace." Mrs. Hendricks' expression softened. "Then I'll have meals sent up for you both, and I'll check in regularly. Ring if you need anything at all." After they left, Adrian settled into the chair beside Thomas's bed and began what would become a vigil that lasted 3 days. Thomas woke in stages over those 3 days, brief periods of consciousness where he would look around in confusion before Adrian's voice would soothe him back into healing sleep. But on the morning of the 4th day, he woke fully, his gray-green eyes clear and focused. "You're real," Thomas said, his voice stronger than it had been on the road. "Thought maybe I dreamed you. Thought maybe I died and you were an angel." "I'm very much real, and decidedly not angelic," Adrian assured him. "How do you feel?" Thomas considered the question with a seriousness that was heartbreaking in someone so young. "Warm. Don't hurt as much. Hungry." He paused. "Where am I?" "Winterbourne Hall, my home. You've been here 4 days recovering from exposure." Adrian poured water from the pitcher Mrs. Hendricks had left. "Can you sit up? You should drink." Thomas struggled upright, and Adrian saw him wince as he moved his injured leg. But the boy's gaze was steady as he accepted the water and drank carefully. "Why'd you bring me here?" Thomas asked when he'd finished. "Why'd you help me?" "Because you needed help. Because leaving you on that road wasn't an option." Adrian met the boy's eyes directly. "Because what your father did was unconscionable, and someone needed to do the right thing. Most people wouldn't have stopped." "Then most people are cowards." Adrian leaned forward. "Thomas, I need to ask you some questions. About your father, about what happened." Thomas' face closed off slightly, but he nodded. "What do you want to know?" "Your full name, where you're from, your father's name and occupation." "Thomas Whitfield, from Harrogate, about 20 miles north of here. My father was Edward Whitfield. He's a mill owner, flour mill." Thomas' hands twisted in the blanket. "My mother died when I was 5, fever. After that, Papa changed, started drinking more, started saying I was cursed, that my bad leg was God's punishment for something." "That's not how God works," Adrian said gently. "And your leg isn't a punishment, Thomas. It's simply a part of you, no more significant than the color of your eyes or your hair. Papa didn't see it that way. Neither did anyone else in Harrogate. Called me names, threw things sometimes. Papa started hiring me out to do work, cleaning stables, hauling water, anything that didn't need fast legs. But I couldn't keep up, kept getting sent back. Last week, Papa said he couldn't afford to keep me anymore. Said I ate too much for what I was worth." Thomas' voice dropped to barely a whisper. 3 days ago, he put me in the wagon, said we were going to York, that he'd found me work there. But instead, he stopped on the road, told me to get out. When I asked why, he said he was done trying to make something useful out of a cripple. And he just left you there? Drove away. I tried to follow, but I can't run. My leg." Thomas looked down at the twisted limb beneath the blankets. "I'm slow, always have been. By the time I made it 100 yards, the wagon was gone. I tried to keep walking, but it was so cold, and I was so tired. I sat down for just a minute, and then I couldn't get up anymore. And then you found me." Adrian felt something murderous settle into his bones. Edward Whitfield, mill owner, Harrogate. He had a name now and a location. He would find this man. He would make him pay for what he'd done to his own son. But first, he needed to address the immediate concern, Thomas's future. "Thomas," Adrian said carefully, "you can't go back to your father. You understand that, don't you? What he did, abandoning you like that, it's not something that can be forgiven or reconciled." "I know." Thomas's voice was small. "But where else can I go? I've got no other family. And who'd want a crippled boy who can't work proper?" "I want you," Adrian said, the words emerging before he'd fully thought them through. But once they were spoken, he realized they were true. "You can stay here, at Winterbourne. not as a servant or a charity case, but as, he paused, considering, as my ward, under my protection and care. Thomas stared at him. You don't mean that. You can't mean that. I absolutely mean it. Adrian leaned forward. I'm a duke, Thomas. I have wealth and power enough to protect you from your father and from anyone else who might wish you harm. I have a large house that's far too empty, and I find that I'm quite angry at a world that would abandon a child simply because he walks differently than others. So yes, I want you to stay. If you're willing. Why? The question was almost a plea. Why would you do this for me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Because it's right, Adrian said simply. Because you deserve to be safe and cared for. Because I looked at you on that road and saw someone who needed help, and I'm capable of providing it. That's reason enough, Thomas. For a long moment, Thomas simply stared at him. Then tears began to slide down the boy's cheeks, silent, exhausted tears that spoke of relief and grief and tentative hope all tangled together. Can I really stay? He whispered. You won't change your mind? Won't send me away when you realize I'm too much trouble? Adrian reached out and took one of Thomas's small hands in his. I give you my word, Thomas Whitfield. As the Duke of Winterbourne, as a man of honor, as someone who has seen enough of the world's cruelty to recognize it when it stares me in the face, you have a home here for as long as you want it. I will not abandon you. I will not give up on you. And I will spend every day proving to you that your father was wrong about your worth. Thomas' tears came harder then, and Adrian found himself pulling the boy into an embrace, careful of his injuries, mindful of his fragility, but offering the physical comfort that Thomas so desperately needed. Thank you, Thomas sobbed against Adrian's shoulder. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Adrian held him and felt something shift fundamentally in his understanding of himself. He'd been alone for so long, had chosen isolation as protection against the pain of human connection. But holding this broken child, offering him sanctuary and safety, Adrian realized that isolation had also been a prison. He was choosing differently now, choosing connection over safety, choosing to care for someone who desperately needed caring for, choosing to become, against all his expectations, something resembling a father. The transformation of Winterbourne Hall began immediately. Adrian hired a tutor, Mr. Benjamin Fletcher, a kind man in his 40s who had experience teaching children with various physical challenges. He brought in Dr. Whitmore regularly to monitor Thomas's recovery and to design exercises that might strengthen the boy's twisted leg without causing pain. He also commissioned a brace. It won't fix the clubfoot, Dr. Whitmore explained as the craftsman took measurements, but it will provide support and stability, should make walking easier, less painful, and it might prevent the leg from deteriorating further as he grows. Thomas endured the fittings with stoic silence, but Adrian saw the hope flickering in the boy's eyes. The hope that perhaps his leg could be improved, that he might walk without quite so much difficulty. When the brace was finally ready, a marvel of leather and metal, surprisingly lightweight, Thomas stared at it as though it were made of gold. "Put it on," Adrian encouraged. "Let's see if it helps." With Dr. Whitmore's assistance, they fitted the brace over Thomas's clubfoot and secured it properly. Then, carefully, Thomas stood. And walked. Not perfectly, not without the slight limp that would likely always characterize his gait, but more easily than before, with less obvious pain, with something approaching normal rhythm. Thomas took 3 steps, then 4, then walked the entire length of the bedroom. When he turned back to face Adrian, his face was radiant with joy. "It works," he breathed. "I can walk almost proper. Look, I can walk." Adrian felt his throat tighten. "You can indeed, and you'll only get stronger with practice and Mr. Fletcher's exercises." Thomas walked back to Adrian and, without warning, threw his arms around the Duke's waist. "Thank you for everything, for saving me, for keeping me, for this." He gestured to the brace. "For making me feel like maybe I'm not broken after all." "You were never broken, Thomas," Adrian said, resting a hand on the boy's dark hair. "You were simply waiting for someone to see past a single physical characteristic to the remarkable person underneath." Over the following weeks, Thomas began to flourish. The malnutrition disappeared as Mrs. Hendricks ensured he ate regular hearty meals. The fear in his eyes gradually faded, replaced by cautious happiness. He took to his lessons with Mr. Fletcher like a starving man to bread, soaking up knowledge with the desperation of someone who'd been denied education. "He's exceptionally bright," Mr. Fletcher told Adrian after a month of tutoring. "Reads above his age level already, despite clearly having had limited access to books before." "His mathematics are weaker, but he's catching up rapidly. If he'd been born to different circumstances, Your Grace, this boy could have gone to university, could have been anything he wanted." "He still can," Adrian said. "Those options haven't closed just because of where he started." Mr. Fletcher smiled. "No, Your Grace, I suppose they haven't, not with you championing him." But it wasn't all smooth progress. Thomas had nightmares, terrible ones, where he woke screaming about cold and abandonment. Adrian would hear him from his adjacent bedroom and would come immediately, sitting with the boy until the terror passed. "I dreamed Papa came back," Thomas admitted one night after a particularly bad episode. "Dreamed he took me away from here, that you couldn't stop him because he's my father and fathers have rights over their children." Adrian felt cold fury settle over him. "Thomas, I need to tell you something. I've been making arrangements, legal arrangements, to ensure that never happens." Thomas looked up at him with wide eyes. "What kind of arrangements?" "I've had my solicitors file a formal case in Chancery Court. I'm seeking to have you made my legal ward permanently, which means your father's parental rights would be terminated, and I would have full legal authority over your care and upbringing." Adrian paused. "There will need to be a hearing. Your father will likely be summoned to contest it. But given what he did, abandoning you on a winter road, I'm confident the court will rule in our favor." "Will I have to see him?" Thomas's voice was very small. "Papa, I mean, if there's a hearing?" "Possibly. But you won't be alone, Thomas. I'll be there, my solicitors will be there, and no one, not your father, not the judge, not anyone, will be allowed to hurt you or take you away." Adrian pulled the boy close. "You're mine now, in every way that matters. I'm just making the law recognize what's already true." "I want that," Thomas whispered. "I want to be yours." "Is that wrong? Should I still love Papa, even after what he did?" "There's no should when it comes to love, Thomas. You feel what you feel. And if what you feel is relief that you don't have to return to someone who hurt you, that's not wrong. That's just honest." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you love me, even though I'm not really your son?" The question pierced something in Adrian's chest. "Yes," he said, and realized it was true. "I love you, Thomas. I didn't expect to. I didn't plan to. But somehow, in the space of 6 weeks, you've become essential to me. So yes, I love you." Thomas's smile was brilliant even in the darkness. "I love you too. Should I call you Papa? Or is that not right, since we're not?" "You can call me whatever feels right to you," Adrian said gently. "Papa, if you'd like, or Adrian, or Your Grace if you're feeling particularly formal. What matters isn't the name, Thomas. It's what's behind it." "Papa," Thomas said, testing the word. Then, more firmly, "Papa." "Yes," Adrian said, his voice rough with emotion. "That's right. I'm your papa now, and I'm going to spend every day proving worthy of that title." The hearing came 3 months after Adrian found Thomas on the frozen road. It took place in the Chancery Court in York, presided over by Master of the Rolls Sir Geoffrey Pemberton, a stern man in his 60s known for his rigid adherence to law, but also for his surprising compassion in cases involving children. Edward Whitfield appeared, as Adrian had known he would. The man was in his 40s, with thinning hair and the ruddy complexion of someone who drank heavily. He wore his best clothes, respectable but not fine, and carried himself with the aggressive defensiveness of someone who knew he'd done wrong but refused to admit it. Thomas sat beside Adrian in the courtroom, his small hand gripping Adrian's sleeve. Adrian had asked if Thomas wanted to remain at Winterbourne during the proceedings, but the boy had insisted on attending. "I want to see it happen," Thomas had said. "Want to watch when they tell Papa he doesn't own me anymore." The hearing began with Adrian's solicitor, Mr. Harrison, presenting the case. He detailed the circumstances under which Adrian had found Thomas, abandoned on a winter road, nearly dead from exposure, deliberately left by his father to die because of his disability. "The evidence is clear," Mr. Harrison argued. "Edward Whitfield committed a crime when he abandoned his son. More than that, he demonstrated such profound unfitness as a parent that no child should ever be returned to his care. My client, the Duke of Winterbourne, seeks permanent wardship not out of whim or fancy, but out of genuine concern for this child's welfare and safety." Edward Whitfield's solicitor, a nervous young man who clearly knew he had a weak case, attempted to argue that Edward had been overwhelmed by financial concerns, that he'd made a terrible mistake in a moment of weakness, that he deeply regretted his actions. "My client acknowledges he erred," the solicitor said, "but he is still the boy's natural father. He has legal rights that cannot simply be stripped away because a wealthy duke has taken an interest in the child." Sir Geoffrey turned his attention to Edward. "Mr. Whitfield, would you care to address the court, to explain your actions on December 12th of this year?" Edward stood, and Adrian felt Thomas tense beside him. "Your Honor, I was desperate. The mill hadn't been doing well, food was scarce, and the boy—" He gestured toward Thomas without looking at him. "The boy couldn't work, couldn't earn his keep. I had debts, and I was facing ruin. I thought—" He paused, seeming to realize how his words sounded. "I thought perhaps someone would find him, take him in, that he'd be better off elsewhere." "You thought someone would find a child you'd abandoned on a winter road in December?" Sir Geoffrey's voice was arctic. "Or did you simply not care whether anyone found him, Mr. Whitfield? Did you hope that nature would solve your problem for you?" Edward's face flushed. He's a cripple, Your Honor. Can't work proper. I couldn't afford." "His name is Thomas," Adrian interjected, his voice cutting. "Not the cripple, not the boy. Thomas. And his disability is no excuse for your monstrous behavior, Whitfield. You abandoned your own child to die. There is no financial pressure, no personal circumstance that justifies that choice." "He cost too much!" Edward burst out. "Ate the same as a normal boy, but couldn't work like one. Every penny spent on him was a penny lost. I had to make a choice. Keep him and face debtor's prison, or find another solution." "So you chose to murder him," Sir Geoffrey said flatly. "Because, make no mistake, Mr. Whitfield, leaving a disabled 7-year-old on a frozen road in December is attempted murder.
The only reason you're not facing criminal charges is that the Duke of Winterbourne, in his mercy, has chosen to focus on securing the child's future rather than pursuing your punishment." Edward's solicitor attempted to speak, but Sir Geoffrey waved Lave to silence. "I'm going to hear from the child now," the judge said. "Thomas Whitfield, can you approach the bench?" Thomas looked up at Adrian, fear clear in his eyes. Adrian squeezed his hand gently.
"You don't have to if you don't want to, but if you're willing, this is your chance to tell your truth." Thomas nodded slowly and stood. With his brace supporting his twisted leg, he walked to the judge's bench, not perfectly, but steadily. A small act of defiance against the father who'd abandoned him for that very leg. "Thomas," Sir Geoffrey said gently, his stern demeanor softening as he looked at the boy, "I need to ask you some questions. Can you do that for me?" "Yes, sir." "Do you want to return to your father's care?" "No, sir." Thomas' voice was clear and firm. "Never." "Why not?" "Because he tried to kill me. Because he said I was worthless. Because he hurt me when I couldn't work fast enough. And he never once said he loved me after Mama died." Thomas' hands clenched at his sides. "And because I have a real papa now. The Duke. He saved me. He gave me a home and made me feel like I matter. He got me a brace so I can walk better and a tutor so I can learn. And he sits with me when I have nightmares. That's what papas are supposed to do, not leave their children to freeze to death on roads." Sir Geoffrey was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very gently, "You call the Duke your papa?" "Yes, sir. He said I could. Said it's not about blood, it's about who takes care of you and loves you." Thomas looked back at Adrian. "And he does both. So he's my papa now, if the law says it's allowed." "Thank you, Thomas. You may return to your seat." Thomas walked back to Adrian and climbed into the chair beside him. Adrian put an arm around the boy's shoulders, a gesture of protection and claim that everyone in the courtroom could see. Sir Geoffrey reviewed his notes for several minutes while the courtroom waited in tense silence. Then he looked up. "I've heard enough. Edward Whitfield, I find your conduct toward your son to be unconscionable and criminal. You have demonstrated such profound unfitness as a parent that I have no hesitation in severing your parental rights permanently. Thomas Whitfield is hereby made a ward of the Duke of Winterbourne, with all legal rights and responsibilities that entails." He paused, then added, "Furthermore, I am remanding your case to the criminal court for prosecution under child abandonment statutes. While His Grace may have chosen mercy, the Crown does not look kindly on those who attempt to murder children." Edward Whitfield went white. "Your Honor, please." "The decision is final, Mr. Whitfield. Thomas is no longer your son. You have no rights to him, no claim on him, and no further contact with him unless he, as an adult, chooses to seek you out, which, given your treatment of him, seems unlikely." Sir Geoffrey's expression was granite. "Take him into custody." Two court officers moved forward to restrain Edward, who began to shout incoherent protests about rights and injustice and the unfairness of dukes being able to steal common men's children. Adrian turned Thomas away from the scene, shielding the boy from his father's breakdown. "It's over," he murmured. "You're safe now. Legally, permanently safe. He can't touch you ever again." Thomas was trembling, but when he looked up at Adrian, his eyes were dry. "I'm really yours now? The law says so?" "The law says so," Adrian confirmed. "You're mine, Thomas. My ward, my responsibility, and, if I have anything to say about it, my son in every way that truly matters." "Papa," Thomas whispered, and buried his face against Adrian's chest. Adrian held him while the courtroom emptied around them, while Edward Whitfield was led away in custody, while the legal machinery of justice ground forward.
held him and felt the profound rightness of this impossible thing that had happened, that he, who had never wanted children, now had a son, that Thomas, who had been abandoned and labeled worthless, now had a father who valued him beyond measure. "Papa," Thomas whispered, and buried his face against Adrian's chest. Adrian held him while the courtroom emptied around them, while Edward Whitfield was led away in custody, while the legal machinery of justice ground forward. Held him and felt the profound rightness of this impossible thing that had happened, that he, who had never wanted children, now had a son. That Thomas, who had been abandoned and labeled worthless, now had a father who valued him beyond measure.
Outside the courthouse, Adrian's carriage waited. He helped Thomas inside, and as they began the journey back to Winterbourne Hall, Thomas asked quietly, "What happens now?" "Now," Adrian considered, "now we go home. We continue your lessons. We work on strengthening your leg. We live our lives without fear of anyone taking you away." "And I'm really your son, even though you didn't birth me and we don't share blood?" "Family isn't defined by blood, Thomas. It's defined by choice and love and commitment." Adrian pulled the boy close. "I chose you the moment I found you on that road. I've been choosing you every day since. That makes you my son in the only way that matters." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I call you Papa all the time now, not just when we're alone?" "I'd be honored if you did." "Papa," Thomas said, testing the word in this new context. Then, more confidently, "Papa." "Yes," Adrian said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's exactly right." They rode in comfortable silence for several minutes before Thomas spoke again. "Papa, what will happen to him, to Edward? Your father, your former father, will face trial for child abandonment. He'll likely spend time in prison, and even if he doesn't, his reputation in Harrogate is ruined. People know what he did. They won't forget." "Good," Thomas said, with a fierceness that was startling in someone so young. "He deserves to suffer, the way he made me suffer." "He does," Adrian agreed, "and he will. Justice may be slow, Thomas, but it's also thorough. Your father will answer for what he did to you." Thomas nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then he settled more comfortably against Adrian's side and fell asleep. The deep, peaceful sleep of a child who finally, truly felt safe. Adrian looked down at him and felt his heart swell with emotions he'd spent most of his adult life avoiding. Love, pride, fierce protectiveness. The bone-deep satisfaction of having saved something precious that the world had tried to discard. He'd found a son on a frozen road, and in saving Thomas, he'd somehow saved himself from isolation, from emotional sterility, from a life lived in careful distance from human connection. They were a family now, not by blood or by conventional means, but by choice and circumstance and the kind of love that transcends ordinary definitions. And Adrian would spend the rest of his life ensuring Thomas never doubted that he was valued, wanted, and absolutely, irrevocably loved. 5 years later, Thomas Whitfield, now formally known as Thomas Blackwood after Adrian had legally changed the boy's surname to match his own, stood in the drawing room of Winterbourne Hall and prepared to meet the woman who would change their lives again. "Do I have to do this?" Thomas asked, fidgeting with his cravat. At 12, he was taller, stronger, and far more confident than the broken child Adrian had found on the road. His leg, supported by increasingly sophisticated braces and strengthened by years of exercise, barely slowed him down anymore. "Meeting potential stepmothers wasn't part of our arrangement, Papa." "No, but me eventually marrying was always an implicit possibility," Adrian pointed out. "I'm a duke, Thomas. I have responsibilities,
including producing a legitimate heir beyond my brother. And you're getting old enough that having a mother figure might be beneficial. I have Mrs. Hendricks. Mrs. Hendricks is your housekeeper who dotes on you like a grandmother. That's different from having an actual mother. Adrian adjusted his own cravat, feeling uncharacteristically nervous. Besides, I think you'll like Lady Caroline. She's intelligent, kind, and she specifically asked to meet you before agreeing to consider my suit. Thomas's eyebrows rose. She did? She did. She said she refused to marry into a family without meeting all its members, and you're as much a member of this family as I am. Adrian smiled. I thought that showed remarkable sense. Or remarkable manipulation. Maybe she's just pretending to care about meeting me to seem appealing to you. When did you become so cynical? When I realized that people often lie to get what they want, Thomas said flatly, especially when what they want involves dukes and fortunes. It was a fair point. Thomas's early experiences had left him wary of others' motives, particularly when those others stood to gain from association with the Duke of Winterbourne. Just meet her, Adrian said. If you truly dislike her, I won't pursue the match, I promise. Thomas sighed dramatically, but nodded. Fine, but I'm watching her carefully. If she's cruel or false, or if she looks at my leg with disgust, then I'll end the courtship immediately, Adrian assured him. Your comfort and happiness are more important to me than any marriage alliance, Thomas. You know that. The butler announced Lady Caroline Hertford's arrival, and Adrian felt his pulse quicken with anticipation he hadn't expected. He'd met Caroline twice before, once at a mutual friend's dinner party and once at the theater, and had been struck by her warmth, her intelligence, and her complete lack of artifice. She was 26, had been widowed young when her first husband died in a hunting accident, and had no children from that brief marriage. She was also beautiful, chestnut hair, warm brown eyes, and a smile that seemed to light up rooms. But none of that would matter if she and Thomas didn't get along. Caroline entered the drawing room with the poise of someone comfortable in aristocratic settings, but without the cold superiority that often characterized society ladies. She curtsied to Adrian, then immediately turned her attention to Thomas. You must be Thomas, she said warmly. Your father has told me so much about you. Though I suspect he's been somewhat biased in his descriptions. Thomas's posture was defensive. What did he tell you? That you're brilliant at mathematics, developing a concerning interest in Gothic novels, and that you've taught yourself to ride despite doctors insisting it would be impossible with your leg. Caroline's smile was genuine. He also said you're fiercely loyal, brutally honest, and the best thing that ever happened to him, which is quite high praise from a duke. Thomas blinked, clearly disarmed. He said all that? He did, though he also warned me that you're suspicious of people's motives, and that I shouldn't be offended if you're initially wary of me. Caroline moved to sit in a chair near Thomas rather than next to Adrian. So I'm going to be very clear about my intentions. I'm considering marrying your father because I find him intelligent, kind, and far more interesting than most men I've met in society. I'm not after his money. I'm quite wealthy in my own right from my first marriage. I'm not desperate for a title. I already have one as a widowed viscountess. And I'm not looking to replace a deceased parent in your life or pretend you're anything other than what you are, the Duke of Winterbourne's chosen son and heir. I'm not his heir, Thomas said. Papa has a brother who'll inherit the title. I'm his ward, his adopted son. You're his son, Caroline corrected gently. Adoption doesn't make you less than. And from what your father has told me, you're the person he considers most important in the world. Which means, if I want a relationship with him, I need to earn your trust as well as his affection. Thomas studied her for a long moment. Most ladies don't notice my leg until I stand up. You looked at it immediately. Why? Because I wanted to see it before you could worry about me seeing it, Caroline said honestly. I wanted you to know that I already know, and it doesn't matter to me one way or the other.
Your value isn't in how your leg functions, Thomas. It's in who you are as a person. That's what Papa says. Then your Papa is a wise man. Caroline's expression softened. Thomas, I understand you have every reason to be suspicious of me. I'm someone new, entering your established life with your father. But I promise you this, I won't try to change your relationship with him. I won't try to come between you. And I won't lie to you or manipulate you to serve my own interests. Those aren't the kind of relationships I want in my life. What kind of relationships do you want? Thomas asked. Honest ones, built on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than social advantage. She paused. I liked your father immediately when we met, but I need to like his family too, Thomas. I need to know that we could all be happy together. So I'm asking, would you be willing to give me a chance? To let me prove I'm sincere? Thomas looked at Adrian, who nodded encouragingly. Then he looked back at Caroline. I'll give you a chance, he said slowly. But I'm watching. If you hurt Papa, or if you're lying about not caring about my leg, or if you try to push me aside now that you're here, then you'll make my life absolutely miserable, and you'll be justified in doing so, Caroline finished. I understand, Thomas, and I respect your protectiveness of your father. It speaks well of you both. The tension in the room eased slightly. They spent the next hour talking about Thomas's studies, about Caroline's interests in literature and music, about Adrian's ongoing work improving tenant conditions on his estates. Caroline asked Thomas questions that showed genuine interest, laughed at his dry observations about society's absurdities, and never once treated him as less than an equal participant in the conversation. When it was time for Caroline to leave, Thomas walked her to the door, a gesture of respect that Adrian noted with approval. Lady Caroline, Thomas said quietly, I think you might be all right. For Papa, I mean. He's been alone too long, and you seem real, not fake like most society ladies. Thank you, Thomas. That might be the highest compliment I've ever received. Caroline smiled at him. And please, call me Caroline. If we're going to be family, formality seems excessive. We're not family yet, Thomas pointed out. No, but I hope we will be. She touched his shoulder gently. You're a remarkable young man, Thomas Blackwood. Your father is lucky to have you. After Caroline left, Adrian turned to Thomas. Well, what's your verdict? Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I liked her. She didn't treat me like a child or a cripple. She treated me like a person whose opinion mattered. And she looked at you, the way— He paused, seeming to search for words. She looked at you the way you look at me, like you're important, like you matter. So you'd approve if I pursued the courtship? I'd approve if you married her tomorrow, Thomas said. But maybe wait at least a few weeks, for propriety's sake. Adrian laughed and pulled Thomas into a quick embrace. When did you become so wise? When I got a papa who taught me what real love looks like, Thomas said. Now I recognize it when I see it, and I see it between you and Lady Caroline. Adrian married Caroline 6 months later in a ceremony at Winterbourne Hall. Thomas served as his father's groomsman, a role that raised some eyebrows among society guests, but that felt absolutely right to everyone who mattered. Caroline moved into Winterbourne Hall and immediately set about making it feel like a genuine home rather than a bachelor's fortress. She filled it with music and laughter, hosted dinners that brought interesting people together rather than just society's elite, and established a warmth that had been missing despite Mrs. Hendrick's best efforts. More importantly, she kept her promise to Thomas. She never tried to replace Adrian in the boy's affections or insert herself as a traditional mother figure. Instead, she became something equally valuable, a friend, a mentor, an adult who listened without judgment and offered guidance without condescension. "You know," Thomas said one evening a year into the marriage, "I was wrong about not needing a mother figure. Caroline's actually pretty excellent at that role." Adrian and Caroline exchanged amused glances across the dinner table. "I thought you had Mrs. Hendricks for that," Adrian teased. "Mrs. Hendricks is wonderful, but Caroline's different. She understands things Mrs. Hendricks doesn't." Thomas looked at his stepmother. "Thank you for not trying to be something you're not, for just being yourself and letting me figure out what that means to me." Caroline's eyes glistened. "Thank you for giving me the chance, Thomas. You've made me feel welcome in ways I never expected." 2 years after the wedding, Caroline gave birth to a daughter, a healthy, squalling infant they named Isabella. Thomas was 13 when his sister was born, and Adrian watched with pride as the boy transformed into a devoted older brother. "She's so small," Thomas marveled, carefully holding Isabella while sitting down so his leg wouldn't be a factor. "Was I this small when you found me?" "No, you were bigger. 7 years old, if you remember." Adrian sat beside them. "But you were just as precious, just as worth protecting." Thomas looked up at him. "Papa, am I still your heir? Or does Isabella change that?" "You're still my primary heir for the estate and fortune," Adrian assured him. "The title will pass to my brother Richard when I die, as it must by law, but everything else, Winterbourne Hall, the other properties, the investments, those are yours, Thomas. I've had it all legally documented. You're my son. Isabella being born doesn't change that." "I wouldn't mind sharing," Thomas said. "Isabella's my sister. She should get some of it too." "Isabella will be well provided for," Caroline said from her position on the sofa, recovering from childbirth. "Your father has established trust funds for both of you. Neither of you will want for anything." "I don't want anything," Thomas said simply, looking down at his baby sister. "This family, this feeling of belonging, everything else is just extra." Adrian felt his heart swell with pride and love. This boy, this young man who had been abandoned on a frozen road, now knew with absolute certainty that he belonged, that he was wanted, that his family was permanent and unconditional. 5 years of careful work, of consistent love, of proving through actions rather than words that Thomas mattered, it had all led to this moment of simple, profound security. 10 years after finding Thomas on that frozen Yorkshire road, Adrian stood in the courtyard of Winterbourne Hall and watched his son, because that's what Thomas was in every way that mattered, prepare to leave for Oxford. Thomas was 17 now, tall and confident, his clubfoot barely noticeable with the sophisticated brace he wore under his boots. He'd grown into a remarkable young man, brilliant in mathematics and sciences, passionate about social reform, determined to use his position as the Duke of Winterbourne's son to make the world better for children who started with disadvantages like his own. "You have everything?" Adrian asked, doing a final check of Thomas's trunk. "Everything except a reason to stop you worrying," Thomas said with a grin. "Papa, I'm going to be fine. It's Oxford, not the battlefield." "I know, Adrian stopped, unable to articulate the complexity of emotions he felt. Pride, certainly, but also fear that he'd lose the closeness they'd built, worry that the world beyond Winterbourne's walls would be cruel to Thomas in ways Adrian couldn't prevent. "You're worried I'll face prejudice because of my leg?" Thomas said, reading Adrian's mind as he often did. "I probably will, but you've taught me how to handle that, Papa. How to stand up for myself without letting others' ignorance define me." "I taught you that? You've been teaching me that since the day you found me." Thomas moved closer. "Every time you've defended me, every time you've insisted I'm as valuable as anyone else, Every time you've told me my leg doesn't define my worth. You've been teaching me how to move through a world that often judges people by their visible differences rather than their character. And you've learned too well. Now you're going off to prove you don't need me anymore. I'll always need you, Papa. Thomas's voice was serious now. You saved my life. You gave me a home and a family and a future I never could have imagined when I was freezing on that road. Nothing that happens at Oxford will change what you mean to me. You're my father. That's permanent. Adrian pulled Thomas into an embrace, not caring that they were standing in the courtyard in full view of servants and guests. I'm so proud of you, more than I can express. I know. You tell me constantly. Thomas pulled back with a smile. And I'm proud of you too, Papa, for seeing past a dirty, broken child on a road to who he could become, for choosing to build a family instead of living alone, for being the kind of father every child deserves but so few ever get. Caroline appeared in the doorway with Isabella, now 8 years old, and every bit as devoted to her older brother as he was to her. Thomas! Isabella ran forward and wrapped her arms around him. Do you have to go? Can't you study here? I'll be back for holidays, Thomas promised, crouching down to her level. And I'll write you letters every week. You can practice your reading by deciphering my terrible handwriting. Promise you won't forget about us, Isabella said, her lower lip trembling. Impossible. You're all far too memorable. Thomas kissed her forehead. Besides, Winterbourne is home. I'll always come back here. He said his goodbyes to Caroline, to Mrs. Hendricks, who was openly weeping, to the staff who'd watched him grow from a frightened 7-year-old to a confident young man. Then he climbed into the carriage that would take him to Oxford. As the carriage pulled away, Thomas leaned out the window and called back, "Thank you, Papa, for everything!" Adrian raised a hand in farewell, his vision blurred by tears he no longer tried to hide. "He'll be remarkable," Caroline said softly, taking Adrian's hand. "He already is, because of you." "Because of us," Adrian corrected. "We built this family together, Caroline. Thomas is who he is because he's been loved consistently and well." "Do you ever regret it?" Caroline asked. "Taking him in that day? Changing your entire life for a child you didn't know?" "Never." Adrian's answer was immediate and absolute. "Finding Thomas on that road, it was the moment my real life began. Everything before that was just waiting. I didn't know what I was waiting for until I found him. But the moment I picked him up and promised him I wouldn't leave him, that's when everything changed." "You saved each other," Caroline observed. "We did," Adrian agreed. "He needed someone to believe he was worth saving, and I needed someone to teach me that love isn't a weakness or a burden. It's the thing that makes life worth living." They stood together, watching until the carriage disappeared from sight, carrying Thomas toward his future. A future built on the foundation of being valued, of being chosen, of knowing with absolute certainty that he was wanted. A future that began on a frozen road, where a duke found a discarded child and decided that society's definitions of worth were wrong. A future where family was defined by choice and love rather than blood. And a future that proved every single day that sometimes the greatest legacies aren't the ones we inherit. They're the ones we choose to create through acts of courage, compassion, and unconditional love. Epilogue. 25 years after Adrian found Thomas on that frozen road, the Duke of Winterbourne, now in his late 50s but still vigorous, sat in his study at Winterbourne Hall and read the letter that had just arrived from London. "Dear Papa, I write with news that I hope will please you. Parliament has passed the Child Protection Act that I've been championing for the past 3 years.
Starting next year, it will be a criminal offense to abandon children, to deny them basic necessities, or to abuse them based on physical disabilities. The penalties are severe, including prison time and permanent loss of parental rights. This law won't undo what was done to me or to countless other children like me, but it might prevent future children from experiencing what I did. It might save some young boy from freezing on a roadside because his father deemed him worthless. I thought you'd want to know. This law exists because you taught me that every child has value, regardless of their physical abilities. Because you showed me what protection and love look like. Because you gave me the education and the platform to fight for others who start where I started. Thank you, Papa, for everything, again and always. Your son, Thomas Blackwood, MP. Adrian set the letter down with hands that trembled slightly. Thomas was a member of Parliament now, using his position to advocate for vulnerable children and social reform. He'd married a wonderful woman named Margaret 2 years earlier, and they were expecting their first child. The boy Adrian had found broken and abandoned on a winter road had become a man who was changing the world. Caroline entered the study and found Adrian wiping his eyes. Good news from Thomas? The best news. Adrian handed her the letter. He's done it. The Child Protection Act has passed. Children like he was, they'll be protected now, by law. Caroline read the letter and smiled through her own tears. He's extraordinary. Because you taught him to be. No, he was always extraordinary. I just gave him the chance to become what he already was. Adrian stood and moved to the window, looking out at the grounds where he'd taught Thomas to ride, where he'd played with Isabella, where he'd built a family from the ashes of his own lonely existence. Do you know what Thomas told me last time he visited? Adrian said. He said that being abandoned on that road was both the worst and best thing that ever happened to him. Worst because of the trauma and the betrayal. Best because it led him to me, to this family, to a life he could never have imagined. And what did you say? I told him finding him was the best thing that ever happened to me. That everything good in my life traces back to that moment when I decided to stop and help a child in need rather than riding past. Adrian turned back to Caroline. I meant it, Caroline. Thomas saved me just as much as I saved him. I know, Caroline said softly. I've always known. You were drowning in loneliness and isolation when you found him. He gave you purpose, gave you love, reminded you what it means to be fully human rather than just a title and a fortune. Adrian pulled her close. We should visit Thomas in London soon. See the new house he and Margaret have bought. Start planning to be grandparents. Grandparents, Caroline laughed. How did we get here, Adrian? How did the bachelor duke who never wanted children end up as a grandfather? By choosing differently, Adrian said. By stopping on a frozen road instead of riding past. By taking a broken child home and learning to love him. By building a family one choice at a time, every day, for 25 years. And would you do it again? Make all the same choices? In a heartbeat, Adrian said. Every single one. Because those choices led me here, to you, to our family, to a life far richer than anything I could have planned. He looked down at Thomas' letter again, at the elegant handwriting that had once been a child's cramped scrawl, at the news of laws that would protect vulnerable children, at the evidence of how far they'd both come from that frozen December morning. Thank you, Adrian said quietly, not sure if he was speaking to Thomas or to fate or to whatever force had put him on that specific road at that specific moment. Thank you for the chance to be someone's father, to build something meaningful, to learn what love really means. Outside, snow began to fall, the first of the winter season. Adrian watched it accumulate on the grounds and thought about another snowfall 25 years earlier, when he'd found something precious that the world had tried to discard. He'd built a life from that moment, a family, a legacy of love that would outlast titles and fortunes and all the superficial markers of success that society valued. And he'd do it all again in an instant. Because some things, some people, are worth changing everything for. And Thomas had been worth it all.